I am Mehmet, son of Murad, heir to the Ottoman throne, and I carry within my chest the dreams of generations. Today, as I stand upon the hills overlooking Constantinople, the morning mist rising from the Golden Horn like the breath of sleeping giants, I know that destiny has brought me to this moment. I am 21 years old, yet the weight of 8 centuries of Islamic ambition rests upon my shoulders. My father conquered lands and expanded our empire, but he could never claim the prize that matters most, the red apple, as our poets call it. Constantinople, the city of Constantine, the last remnant of the Roman Empire that once ruled the world. For 800 years, Muslim rulers have dreamed of this conquest. For 800 years, these massive walls have stood defiant against siege after siege. But I am not my predecessors. I am Mehmet, and I will be different. The preparations began months ago. In the winter chambers of my palace in Adrianople, I remember that cold February morning when I summoned Halil Pasha, my Grand Vizier, a man who had served my father faithfully, but who looked upon my ambitions with skeptical eyes, his weathered face, marked by decades of warfare, creased with concern as I spread the maps across the oak table. "My Sultan," he said, his voice carrying the careful tone of a man who had learned to speak truth to power, "your father attempted this siege twice and failed. The walls of Constantinople have never been breached. Perhaps we should consolidate our existing territories, strengthen our hold on Anatolia and the Balkans." I studied his face, understanding the wisdom in his words, but feeling the fire of destiny burning in my chest. How could I explain to him that this was not merely about territorial expansion? This was about fulfilling a prophecy, about completing the work that began with the prophet's companions, standing before these very walls centuries ago. "Halil Pasha," I replied, keeping my voice steady though my heart raced with excitement. "My father was a great sultan, but he thought like a traditional besieger. He relied on conventional siege tactics against unconventional defenses. I will not repeat his mistakes." I pointed to the detailed drawings of the Theodosian walls, those triple fortifications that had protected the city for over 1,000 years. These walls were built to withstand the siege engines of the 5th century. But we live in the 15th century. We have weapons our predecessors could never imagine. That was when I told him about my secret correspondence with Orban, the Hungarian cannon maker whose services had been rejected by the Byzantine Emperor Constantine due to lack of funds. How perfectly ironic that their poverty would become the key to their destruction. When Orban arrived at my court, his eyes gleaming with the madness of innovation, I knew I had found my weapon. "My Sultan," Orban had said, bowing deeply but unable to hide his excitement, "I can build you a cannon the likes of which the world has never seen. A bronze monster that can hurl stones weighing 1,200 pounds. No wall on earth can withstand such force." I gave him unlimited resources, the finest bronze in my treasury, and teams of the most skilled craftsmen in the empire. For months, I visited the foundries daily, watching this mechanical miracle take shape. The cannon grew to 27 feet in length, its bronze surface gleaming like captured sunlight. My courtiers whispered that I was mad, that no cannon could be so large and still function. But I believed in the mathematics, in the engineering, in the future that was rushing toward us like a river toward the sea. Yet weapons alone would not win this siege. Constantinople was protected not just by its walls, but by its position. The Golden Horn was blocked by a massive chain, preventing naval access to the city's most vulnerable side. Previous Muslim fleets had broken themselves against this barrier, like waves against rocks. But chains, I realized, were only effective if you approached them conventionally. I remember the night the solution came to me. I was studying the maps by lamplight in my tent, tracing the contours of the land around the Golden Horn with my finger. The Byzantines controlled the mouth of the harbor with their chain, but the hills behind Galata, those hills were undefended, because no one had ever imagined ships sailing over land. When I summoned my naval commander, Suleiman Baltaglu, and explained my plan, his face went through a series of expressions that would have been comical under different circumstances. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then to amazement, and finally to the gleam of understanding that marked all great military innovations. "You want to move the entire fleet overland?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not move," I corrected. "Transport. We'll build wooden rollers, grease them with animal fat, and use teams of oxen and men to pull the ships up and over the hills. By dawn, our fleet will be in the Golden Horn, behind their defenses." The logistics were staggering. 70 ships, some of them full-sized galleys, would need to be transported over 5 miles of rough terrain. It would require thousands of men, hundreds of animals, and perfect coordination. But I could see it in my mind's eye as clearly as if it had already happened. The spring of 1453 arrived with unseasonable warmth, which I took as a favorable omen. By April, My army was assembled outside the walls of Constantinople, and what an army it was! 80,000 men from every corner of my empire, Anatolian cavalry with their curved sabers, gleaming, Janissaries with their distinctive white felt caps and disciplined ranks, Serbian and Bulgarian auxiliaries, and thousands of irregulars hungry for glory and plunder. But numbers alone meant nothing against these walls. As I rode along the line of fortifications on my white charger, studying every tower, every gate, every section of masonry, I felt the weight of history pressing down upon me. How many armies had stood in this same spot? How many generals had stared at these same stones and felt their confidence crumble? The Theodosian walls rose before us like a man-made mountain range. The outer wall stood 20 feet high, backed by a second wall 40 feet tall, and behind that, the inner wall soared 60 feet into the sky. Between each wall lay a killing ground where attackers would be trapped and slaughtered. At the base of the outer wall, a wide moat filled with water reflected the morning sky like a mirror of death. Emperor Constantine XI had only 7,000 men to defend these 12 miles of fortifications, but he had the walls, and walls had proven stronger than armies for a millennium. That night, alone in my command tent, I knelt facing Mecca and prayed with an intensity I had never felt before. Not for victory, victory was in Allah's hands, but for wisdom, for strength, for the ability to be worthy of the trust placed in me by the believers who followed me into battle. "O Allah," I whispered into the darkness, "if this conquest serves your glory and spreads your word, grant me success. If it serves only my pride, let me fail honorably rather than succeed dishonorably." The first shot from Orban's great cannon came at dawn on April 12th. I had positioned myself where I could see both the gun and its target, a section of wall near the gate of St. Romanus. The earth beneath my feet trembled as the massive bronze tube roared to life, belching flame and smoke like some dragon from ancient legend. The 1,200-pound stone ball arched through the morning air with a sound like thunder, and when it struck the wall, the impact could be felt for miles. A section of masonry that had stood for 1,000 years crumbled into dust and rubble. My Janissaries raised a cheer that echoed off the hills, but one breach does not win a siege, and the Byzantines were quick to respond. They worked through the night, every night, rebuilding what we destroyed during the day. They filled the breaches with earth and timber, making temporary repairs that would hold long enough for the next day's bombardment. Constantine proved himself a worthy adversary, appearing wherever the fighting was fiercest, inspiring his men with a courage that commanded even my respect. Days turned into weeks. The great cannon, magnificent as it was, could only be fired 7 times per day. The bronze needed time to cool between shots, and the massive charge of gunpowder created stresses that threatened to destroy the weapon with each use. My smaller cannons maintained a steady bombardment, but progress was slower than I had hoped. It was during these difficult weeks that I began to understand the true nature of leadership. It is not enough to plan brilliantly or to inspire troops. Before a battle, a leader must maintain morale when victory seems distant, must project confidence when doubt gnaws at his own heart, must find solutions when problems seem insurmountable. Some of my advisors suggested lifting the siege, perhaps attempting to take the city through negotiation or starvation rather than direct assault. But I knew that this was my moment, my test. If I failed here, I would be remembered as just another sultan who dreamed too large. If I succeeded, I would transform not just my empire, but the entire balance of power in the world. The breakthrough came on April 22nd, though not through my cannons. That was the night we moved the fleet. I had spent weeks preparing for this operation, but even I felt my breath catch as I watched 70 ships being hauled up the hills behind Galata. Under cover of darkness, the sound was indescribable. The groaning of wooden hulls under stress, the bellowing of oxen, the shouts of thousands of men working in perfect coordination, all muffled by the blankets we had hung to deaden sound. By dawn, my fleet sat in the Golden Horn like a flock of impossible birds that had learned to fly over mountains. The chain that had protected Constantinople's northern flank for centuries was now useless. The Byzantines woke to find Ottoman warships where no ships should have been able to sail. I watched from the hills as panic spread through the city. Church bells rang an alarm, and I could see people running through the streets, pointing at our ships in disbelief. Constantine's forces were now divided, forced to defend not just the land walls, but the sea wall as well. But it was not enough. Even with our fleet in position, even with daily bombardment from the great cannon, the walls held. By early May, I could sense restlessness in my army. The men had expected a quick victory, and the extended siege was testing their patience. That was when I received the most crucial intelligence of the entire campaign. A Serbian engineer in my service, a man named Zagan Pasha, came to my tent with information that changed everything. My sultan, he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "There's a section of the wall near the Palace of Blachernay where the defenders have made a critical error. They've blocked up a small gate called the Kirkaporta to strengthen their defenses. But in doing so, they've created a blind spot in their watch. If we could get a small force through that area under cover of darkness." I studied the detailed drawings he had made, understanding immediately what he was suggesting. It would not be easy. The assault would have to be perfectly timed, with multiple diversionary attacks to draw the defenders' attention, while a select force attempted to penetrate this weakness. But as I looked at those drawings, I felt the excitement building in my chest. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The convergence of preparation, opportunity, and divine favor. On May 28th, I called my commanders together for what I knew would be our final council of war. These men had followed me faithfully through months of siege, had trusted in my vision even when victory seemed impossible. Now I would ask them to risk everything on one final gamble. Tomorrow, I told them, we take the city, not through bombardment, not through starvation, but through the courage and skill of our warriors. We will attack at multiple points simultaneously, a general assault on the land walls, a naval attack from the Golden Horn, and a special operation against the Kirkaporta Gate. I could see the mixture of excitement and apprehension in their faces. They knew, as I knew, that this assault would either crown our siege with victory or end it in catastrophic failure. That night, I walked alone through my camp, stopping to speak with soldiers around their fires. These men, from farm boys to grizzled veterans, had placed their trust in my leadership. They deserved to understand what we were attempting and why it mattered. "My friends," I said to a group of janissaries sharpening their scimitars by firelight, "tomorrow we make history, not for gold or glory, but to fulfill a promise made by the prophet himself. 800 years ago, he spoke of the blessed commander who would conquer Constantinople. Tomorrow, Allah willing, we discover if I am worthy of that blessing." The final assault began before dawn on May 29, 1453. I had divided my forces into 3 waves. Irregulars and volunteers would attack first, wearing down the defenders and filling the moats with fascines and rubble. The Anatolian troops would follow, pressing the attack and creating chaos along the entire line. Finally, my janissaries, the finest infantry in the world, would deliver the killing blow. As the first wave rushed toward the walls in the pre-dawn darkness, I felt a strange calm descend upon me. All the planning, all the preparation, all the sleepless nights, they were over now. The outcome was in the hands of Allah and the courage of my warriors. The sound was overwhelming. Thousands of men shouting battle cries in a dozen languages, the crash of ladders against stone, the whistle of arrows and the crack of firearms. The Byzantines fought with the desperation of men defending their last stronghold, and for hours the outcome remained uncertain. It was during the height of the battle that the miracle occurred. Hassan, a giant janissary from Ulubad, somehow managed to scale the walls near the gate of St. Romanus and plant our standard on the battlements. The sight of the Ottoman crescent flying above the walls that had never been breached sent a surge of energy through my entire army. More men followed Hassan up the walls, and suddenly what had been an orderly defense collapsed into chaos. I could see Byzantine soldiers abandoning their positions, some fleeing toward the inner city, others making desperate last stands that could only end in death. Emperor Constantine, true to his imperial heritage, chose death over surrender. Later, I would learn that he had thrown off his imperial regalia and died fighting as a common soldier. His body found only after the battle by the double-headed eagle embroidered on his undergarments. I mourned his passing, for he had proven himself a worthy enemy. By midday, the city was ours. My soldiers poured through the breached walls and opened gates like water through a broken dam. The great chain across the Golden Horn, that symbol of Byzantine defiance, was finally lowered, and my ships sailed triumphantly into the harbor. But victory brought responsibilities as well as celebration. I rode through the conquered city with mixed emotions, elation at achieving what no Muslim ruler had accomplished before, but also soberness at the weight of what I had inherited. The Hagia Sophia rose before me like a mountain of stone, and faith, its massive dome seeming to touch the heavens themselves. For nearly 1,000 years, this had been the greatest church in Christendom, the symbol of Byzantine power and Orthodox faith. Now it would become a mosque, the symbol of Ottoman triumph and Islamic expansion. As I dismounted and walked through those ancient doors, my footsteps echoing in the vast silence, I felt the full weight of history settling upon my shoulders. Justinian had built this church to glorify God and demonstrate the power of the Roman Empire. Now I would transform it to serve the same God in a different tradition. I knelt on the marble floor and pressed my forehead to the stone, offering prayers of thanksgiving for the victory Allah had granted. Round me my soldiers waited in respectful silence, understanding that this moment transcended military conquest and entered the realm of the sacred. Standing in the Hagia Sophia that day, I understood that I had become more than Mehmet II, Sultan of the Ottomans. I had become Mehmet the Conqueror, Fatih, the fulfillment of prophecy and the harbinger of a new age. Constantinople was dead. In its place, Istanbul would rise, not just a new name for an old city, but the capital of an empire that would span 3 continents and endure for centuries. The boy who had dreamed impossible dreams had become the man who made them reality. Yet even in that moment of supreme triumph, I felt the burden of what I had achieved. I was no longer just a conqueror, but a guardian of civilization, responsible for the welfare of Christians and Muslims alike, for the preservation of learning and culture, for the governance of an empire that now stretched from the Danube to the Euphrates. The red apple had been plucked at last, but I understood that this conquest was not an end but a beginning. The Ottoman Empire would now face the challenges of true greatness: how to govern justly, how to balance expansion with consolidation, how to remain true to our Islamic principles while ruling over diverse populations. As the sun set over my conquered city, painting the domes and minarets gold in the dying light, I stood on the walls that had defied 8 centuries of Islamic ambition, and felt the satisfaction of destiny fulfilled. I was 21 years old, and I had changed the world. But the real work, building something worthy of such a conquest, was only beginning. The boy from Adrianople who had dreamed of the red apple was gone forever. In his place stood Mehmet Fatih, conqueror of Constantinople, sultan of sultans, shadow of God on earth. History would remember this day, I knew, as the moment when the medieval world ended and the modern world began. And I, by the grace of Allah and the courage of my warriors, had been the instrument of that transformation. Constantinople had fallen. The Roman Empire, which had endured for over 2,000 years, had finally breathed its last. In its place rose something new, something unprecedented, a truly global Islamic empire with its capital in the city that commanded the crossroads of Europe and Asia. As I walked through the conquered halls of the Byzantine palace, my mind was already racing ahead to the future. Roads to be built, laws to be codified, monuments to be erected. The conquest was complete, but the creation of a new world order had only just begun. I was Mehmet the Conqueror, and this was my moment. This was the day I had been born to witness, the victory I had been destined to achieve. The red apple was mine, and through it, the future belonged to the Ottoman Empire. The bells of Hagia Sophia fell silent that day, replaced by the call of the muezzin echoing across the 7 hills. The last emperor of Rome was dead, and in his place stood the first Ottoman Caesar, heir to both Alexander and Augustus, guardian of the gateway between East and West. The conquest was complete. The transformation of the world had begun, and I, Mehmet Fatih, had been chosen by history to be its architect. The boy who had dreamed impossible dreams had become the man who made them reality. Constantinople was ours, and with it, the future itself lay open before us like an uncharted sea, waiting to be explored by Ottoman ships sailing under the crescent moon and star. This was my victory, my moment, my gift to history. I was 21 years old, and I had conquered the unconquerable city. The red apple that had tempted Muslim rulers for 8 centuries was finally within our grasp. And it was only the beginning.